Now, Ohio State owning the conference, that's got to be a certain level of frustration or a certain category of frustration. But Penn State has clearly been the team that has been the closest on the field, in recruiting, etc. Then when somebody finally passes Ohio State, it's not Penn State, it's Michigan. Is that a different frustration?
Yeah,
well, you want to take this one? You've been harping on this for a while.
Yeah, my biggest thing with this was Michigan is already viewed as a bigger brand than Penn State. And right or wrong, that's how it is. And, you go back to the last 15, 20 years, Penn State has been the better program. They've won more games. They've won more games head-to-head in that matchup that Michigan has. They've beaten Ohio State more times. They've won more Big Ten titles. Even after this year, they've still beaten Ohio State more times and won more Big Ten titles than Michigan has since, I think, 2005. That said, Michigan can now hang their hat on being a college football college football playoff program, which Penn State cannot do. And that can make a big difference in recruiting. It'll be interesting to see how this goes. I mean, Michigan finished this recruiting cycle really strong, which you would expect. You go back to Penn State when they win the Big Ten in 2016, for example, they finished that cycle really strong. Next cycle, we'll really see we'll really show if we can see if there's going to be a big playoff bump or anything like that for Michigan. But yeah, it's Michigan doing this definitely is not a good thing for Penn State. But that said, if the Nittany Lions can come out next year and go to Ann Arbor and beat Michigan, that really kind of helps calm things. I think that's possible because Michigan does lose a lot. Yeah, and it's just, it's very annoying as a Penn State fan because I think I speak for most Penn State fans when I say within the conference, the two teams that are just the most difficult to swallow for two different reasons is Ohio State and Michigan. With Ohio State, I always tell people, a lot of us Penn State fans, we can't stand Ohio State, but it's almost more of a respect thing because, you're what we want to be. You're what every program wants to be. Michigan is annoying because, while Penn State has been the better program for the last 15 or so years, a lot of people view Michigan as the superior program. So it's very easy for me to root against Michigan. And it's bothersome to me too this year. Blake Corum, his cousin and my oldest son are best friends. And he comes from a great family. And it's just I know he's a great kid and I just want to see them lose. So I feel bad for that. But once he's out of Michigan, it'll be great because it'll be easy for me to go back to disliking everything about Michigan.
You are right, Marty. There's no doubt. We have these kind of discussions and debates all the time. People call in, and if people start listing elite programs and they get past all the obvious ones, and I mean in the moment, not necessarily historically, but kind of a combination of the two, they always get to Michigan before they get to Penn State.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense over the last 20 years.
Even if you go back longer, this was going back a few years, so my numbers could be a bit off here. But I remember looking back 2 or 3 years ago, since I think I want to say 1970, Penn State had more national championships, more 10-win seasons, more conference championships, and yet Michigan is just – and I think it's because they do such a good job of marketing their brand, and they were kind of more of that traditional power before Penn State became that traditional power. But, yeah, it's extremely frustrating because there definitely have been recruiting battles over the years that Penn State has lost to Michigan because Michigan is viewed as the bigger brand and the bigger program, whether that's true or not.
Right. It does, talking about what Marty said, yeah, it's certainly annoying. Initially, it was just, okay, well, you got this Ohio State death machine to try to somehow beat. But now here comes Michigan storming through and winning the Big Ten in a year when nobody was picking them to do so. In fact, I'm thinking back to this past offseason. Paul Feinbaum was and other pundits were basically, they were already writing Jim Harbaugh's coaching obituary at Michigan. They were all thinking this was it for him. Some people were surprised he didn't get fired after last year. But I guess credit to the Michigan athletic department for being patient. I mean, I know they restructured his contract to a lower salary and buyout, but it would have. I guess the easy thing would have been to cave in the public pressure and get rid of him. But now they're being rewarded for their patience, and Penn State's kind of in a similar situation. I mean, they were obviously James Franklin was nowhere near the hot seat, but definitely a lot of frustration from the fan base over how this season went. A lot of people were certainly would have been okay with him moving on to another program. Back when he was rumored for USC, LSU with jobs. But I'm hoping now, especially with his recent extension, with the commitment from the university to upgrade facilities, upgrade the athlete dorms, especially because Nittany Apartments is something that's stuck in the 80s as far as structures are concerned. Things like that, and of course, he has a recruiting class coming in. I think I'm hopeful that Penn State fans will be rewarded in a similar way. The athletic department's patience with Franklin and commitment to him is going to pay off, similar to what it did for Michigan. And I guess in short term, it's Michigan will certainly be tougher on the recruiting trail. I think that being said, it doesn't seem as if Penn State and Michigan compete for the same recruits as much as you might think. At least from what I've noticed, it seems to be more, Ohio State or SEC programs are, the ones to look out for typically.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. They don't compete for a lot of the same recruits. Sometimes you'll see kids in Western Pennsylvania that they'll both go after, and down in like Maryland and DC. But I think to me, the biggest thing that could be a pain in the neck for Penn State is this is going to make it even easier for Michigan to recruit nationally, which they already did better than Penn State. Now, a lot of times Penn State, with Franklin v. Harbaugh, Franklin would sign the better recruiting class because Penn State would do a good job of kind of cleaning up in the region. But Michigan had the ability to go out and recruit California, recruit the South better than Penn State. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing moving forward is this being a playoff team. You have Aiden Hutchinson as a Heisman finalist. Like all of this gives Michigan the ability to continue to do that well. And that could lead to them signing better classes. Not so much taking kids away from Penn State. We've seen it happen a few times. Like Khalil Hudson's a big example of that. But I think it's going to be more of them being able to recruit nationally better could lead to their classes being equal to or better than Penn State's, which in turn makes things a bigger pain in the neck for Penn State moving forward. But again, like I said, you go to Ann Arbor next year and you beat them and you put together a 10-win season and all of this is forgotten because Penn State's back to being what they've been the last 5-6 years under James Franklin.
And to your point, California produced the most Michigan signees in this recruiting class than any other state.